2021 has been nothing but hectic, the cybersecurity world included. I tasked Danny Palmer with pulling together what he believes were the three worst cybersecurity incidents of the year. Danny, I don't think that this was necessarily an easy ask, but go ahead and tell us what do you believe was the worst cybersecurity incident of the year?
Well, you're right there, because it seems that 2021, we thought, oh, how could it be worse than 2020? How could it be worse than 2019 in terms of cyber incidents? But they still seem to be escalating in terms of severity and impact. So I think the first one I will list here is the Colonial pipeline ransomware attack, which hit the northeastern United States in the summer of this year. I mean, ransomware has been a problem for a long time, but in this case, the attack affected gas supplies for a lot of the northeastern United States. So this ransomware attack, where it meant that files and servers were encrypted, which meant Colonial turned off some of their systems, preventing them being able to supply the gas to large parts of the US. That had an impact on the real world, as it were. You saw various footage of people lining up to get gas when it was running out, people filling carrier bags with gasoline. It's one of those things that made people help realize that this is a major deal. It's not just some mystical event that only locks the computers in an office. It can have an impact on critical national infrastructure. Such was the impact of this. It's arguably what caused the White House to start taking a closer look at the threat of ransomware. There were reports of Joe Biden speaking to President Vladimir Putin of Russia about this sort of thing, because the Russian state isn't behind ransomware attacks, but it's generally there's a consensus that a lot of the biggest ransomware groups are running out of Russia, but the Russian state kind of has a hands-off approach. After this event, a couple of major groups seemed to go dark. Some of them have re-emerged, some of them disappeared completely. But it just went to show that how a cyber event can have such a massive impact on things. I mean, this was gasoline, but what if it happened to electric power or any other utilities? It was one of the major ransomware events of the year, and what has been a big year for ransomware. In a few weeks after that, there was the Kaseya ransomware event, where cyber criminals got into the supply chain of a software supplier, Kaseya, and that meant that a lot of their customers were locked with ransomware, which meant a lot of stores around the world, the US, Europe, even reports of it in New Zealand, they were shut down because of a cyber attack. And on the subject of ransomware continued, there was the ransomware attack against the Irish healthcare service earlier this year as well, which affected healthcare for many, many people. I mean, it's December now, and a recent report looking at the incident suggested that it's still having long-term impacts now because of the backlog of things that have happened. Hospitals are something that are quite regularly targeted by ransomware. But for some peculiar reason, it was the fact that ransomware affected gas in the United States that called the authorities into action. It is just it shows that there's some fight back, for want of a better term, on it now. But ransomware and Colonial was one of the biggest issues of this year, and it unfortunately it's likely to continue into the next.
Colonial Pipeline was insane, and it caught the eye of so many people who don't usually worry about cybersecurity incidents. So very deserving of number one. What is number two on your list?
I'm going to say the second most impactful in terms of what I've been following, even though we're only in the early stage of this right now, is the Log4j vulnerability, which was a vulnerability discovered in Java logging libraries, which essentially can allow attackers to take control of entire systems by performing a reasonably menial task. I mean, we're still in the very early days of this right now. I mean, at the time of recording, it was a week ago that it first came to light. But it's got a lot of people worried because the simple nature of the attack, plus of how ubiquitous this logging library is in cloud applications, enterprise software, applications we all use every day, has made a lot of people worried. I mean, there are already reports of it being exploited for various things. And it's one of those things where a lot of experts warn that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and it's going to get worse, because there are updates which can be applied to help fix it. But there's the combined problems of a lot of organizations are still trying to figure out if they're affected by this. Because one of the issues of Log4j is that because it's open source software, you might not necessarily know you have it in your system. So you've got that thing, you're looking for it in the first place. And then there's the case where even if you think, okay, none of our products actually run it, that's not a guarantee that it's not affecting you either, because it could be in your supply chain somewhere. It could be deep inside the code of something you don't know about. And so a lot of cybersecurity experts have warned that this is going to be an ongoing threat into next year. I mean, there's already been cases of cyber criminals trying to use it, nation state hackers trying to use it, and it's something that's going to have a long tail. So it's one of the biggest stories of the year coming right at the end, and it's just another example of how vulnerable the entire internet can really be to this sort of thing. There's such minor components we don't really think about can have, if a vulnerability is found in them, can have a major impact. So that's definitely another one of the top vulnerabilities of this year from thinking about it.
Log4j is overwhelming because, just like you said, it is very difficult to know whether you've been affected, your company's been affected, your coworkers have been affected. We're going to see the effects of this definitely into 2022. So what was your your third cybersecurity worst incident of the year?
Well, if Log4j hadn't come along, this probably would have been one of there instead of it. But the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability was another major event of this year, where basically it was discovered that there were 4 zero-day vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange Server. A Microsoft Exchange Server is used to run emails on Microsoft suites, which basically meant that by using these 0 days, attackers could get into inboxes and use that to conduct cyber attacks. So you could go from relatively simple things like just spying on those emails to much more advanced types of attacks by using that access via the email accounts to escalate your privileges and conduct more sophisticated, higher damage attacks. I mean, ultimately, the attack has been attributed to nation-state-backed hackers working out of China. I mean, many of the Western national cybersecurity bodies and Western governments have said this. And the problem was, like Log4j, is this software is so common. It's really, really used far and wide, and there are many instances where people and organizations were worried that there could have been thousands upon thousands of breaches using these vulnerabilities. Like many other vulnerabilities, a patch was released for this, a critical patch asking people to update their systems. Even after the patch was released, though, there were still so many cyber attackers looking to exploit these vulnerabilities, because like any other vulnerability, once it's publicly disclosed, it's almost a race against time to patch the systems before attackers exploit them. So you had people delivering malware, criminals delivering ransomware, all sorts of things in order to try and use these newly detailed 0 days in order to launch attacks. I mean, like many other vulnerabilities, there are going to be still systems out there which aren't patched against this and still are vulnerable to this. And it's just one of the age-old things of many vulnerabilities over the years, that as long as there are patches available, you should be patching these things. But unfortunately, there are some systems which will always be vulnerable, maybe because they can't be patched, maybe because the administrators can't, or just don't want to do the upgrades. So that was one of the third major thing I thought of here on this list, because the impact was far and wide. It's just one of those things that goes to show that how nation state attacks are such a major thing that are being think about. I mean, I mentioned it in the ransomware thing. There's a whole geopolitical element to cyber attacks now, and a diplomacy type of thing where countries all around the world are suspicious of other countries launching and conducting attacks. And again, as things get more and more online, it's probably just another thing that unfortunately we're going to have to look out for. I mean, you and I as individuals are probably not going to be affected by nation state cyber attacks, but large enterprises, organizations, tech firms, universities, all are regular targets for cyber espionage. And vulnerabilities like this are just going to make organizations more vulnerable to that sort of thing. So I've said it many times as we've spoken over this year. One of the key things is applying patches to your system. So whatever the vulnerability, whatever the attack, you've got the strongest chance of protecting against it, no matter what it is. I mean, it's something that many experts say, will stop 99% of attacks. So it's a very important thing to do, and something that needs to constant thinking about, really, in order to help protect your networks as much as possible, because protecting against cyber attacks is much easier than reacting to falling victim to a cyber attack and dealing with the fallout. So like I say, if there's one message from all of this, it's apply the security patches to your systems and use multi-factor authentication. So if accounts are breached, it's more difficult for attackers to use them without being noticed.
All right, Danny, thank you so much for those helpful prevention tips and for gathering this list in general to stay on top of all of the latest cybersecurity happenings as we head into the new year. Be sure to stick with ZDNet. Thanks so much for watching.